Recently, New Age guru Deepak Chopra wrote an article for the Huffington Post called Why God Makes More Sense Than Atheism. Since Chopra is a big-time proponent of New Age medicine and regularly incorporates pseudoscience and mysticism into his books, I didn't have high hopes for the quality of argument I would find in his article. After reading the article, I have to say that it fell short even of my very low expectations. The article begins, strangely enough, with the admission that science has done more good for human beings than God, at least on a practical level.
After 2 centuries of the tug-of-war between science and religion, it's clear science occupies the dominant position. It has passed the so what test, meaning that science, as applied to practical daily life, has been immensely more important to modern people than God.
After getting that out of the way, Chopra launches into the crux of his argument.
I've always felt that this lopsided advantage we automatically give to science and therefore to atheism is unfair. In a new book, The Future of God, I turn the tables, proving as best I can that God isn't just a humane, comforting, or moral choice, but the most practical source of well-being.
So how does Deepak Chopra plan to accomplish this demonstration? By challenging 5 atheist conceptions of religion.
Number 1, science isn't by definition anti-religious.
This is true enough in some sense, although scientists are generally far more atheistic than non-scientists. There are plenty of examples to the contrary. Ken Miller, for example, is a cell biologist and molecular biologist at Brown University. He is also a Roman Catholic. But let's think for a moment about what science is. Science is the study of the natural world based on facts learned through observation and experiment. If one takes a scientific view of reality, that is to say, if one accepts science as the most potent tool for understanding the workings of the world, then one would have a hard time hypothesizing that there is such a thing as God. There is no reliable evidence to establish the existence of God, or even to merely suggest the existence of God. Science will likely never disprove the existence of God, but nor will it ever disprove Odin, Santa Claus, voodoo, rain dances, or werewolves. It is impossible to prove or disprove something which is not observable and not available for testing. So, while science might not be anti-religious by definition, religion's call for faith without evidence is very much at odds with science's insistence on strong, empirical evidence.
Number 2, atheists have a point when they accuse organized religion of a litany of gross failings, including crusades, jihads, and the Inquisition, but religions are human institutions prone to every human failing. Religious history is about us, not about whether God exists.
This strikes me as a very odd thing to say when your opening argument is that
God isn't just a humane, comforting, or moral choice, but the most practical source of well-being.
If God is truly the most practical source of well-being, then why the Crusades? Why the jihads? Why the Inquisition? Why Manifest Destiny? Why the Westboro Baptist Church? Why ISIS? If religion was truly an overflowing spring of well-being, then where do these events and groups come from? Chopra is correct when he says that the failings of religion don't necessarily disprove God. They do, however, I think, make a good case against the efficacy of religion as a practical source of well-being.
Number 3, God can be approached without resorting to the cultural mythology of a humanized father and mother watching over us from heaven. Atheists largely attack this myth, but smashing a myth doesn't mean you've smashed reality.
The problem with this is that the entire basis for God's existence is mythological. You're essentially trying to separate the myth from the myth. It's like trying to say that almost every aspect of the Spider-Man comic book is fictional. There are no supervillains like the Green Goblin or Venom. There is no Mary Jane or Aunt May. You can't really get superpowers from being bitten by a radioactive spider. But, even though all of that is false, Spider-Man himself is still real. Spider-Man only exists in the fictional world of the stories that we tell about him. The same can be said of God. To try to pull either Spider-Man or God out of their respective mythologies and keep their character intact is ludicrous.
Number 4, there is a rich tradition, both east and west, of an impersonal God. This God is the source of consciousness and all that we associate with consciousness: self-awareness, intelligence, creativity, evolution, etc.
This is very nearly as meaningless as the prattlings of those people who say things like, "What if the universe is God?" There's no reason for the universe to be God. Why can't the universe just be the universe? Deepak Chopra says that God is the source of consciousness. There are two problems with this. First, the brain and central nervous system are the source of consciousness. We don't understand consciousness fully yet, but we understand enough about it to know that God is not needed to explain it, just as he wasn't needed to explain why the planets formed or where life came from or how the diversity of life emerged. Second, this is a game of semantics. You can't prove the existence of God as he is defined in mythology, so you seek to update God by just saying, well, God is consciousness. Why can't consciousness just be consciousness? And where is your evidence for that claim? I could just as easily say, God is shoes. That's right. We've spent all this time looking for God, and all the while he was on our feet, keeping them warm and protected at all times. Let us give thanks to God. Let us give thanks to our shoes, and kill all the barefoot heathens, of course.
Number 5. The experience of God is found inside our own consciousness, not out there in a supernatural realm.
That sounds an awful lot like a flat-out admission that this God character is just in your heads. And on that point, I agree completely. I don't want to subject you to the next 2 paragraphs of his piece, so I will summarize them like so.
Richard Dawkins and his friends are a bunch of jerks who try to make believers like me seem stupid when in fact we're really smart. They believe that only physical objects and processes can be real, and therefore they are naive realists. They don't believe in introspection, and only believe what they can perceive with their senses.
Okay, now that he has set the stage for his next, big argument, let's hear the actual opening line of the next paragraph.
The problem with naive realism is that, although workable, it's not scientifically valid, and it can't possibly lead to God.
Why is so-called naive realism not scientifically valid? Because quantum physics are weird, yo! His actual quote,
Quantum physics has totally dismantled the validity of the 5 senses when it comes to understanding the real reality that defies not just our eyes and ears, but our common sense and our reliance on such appearances as linear time and 3-dimensional space. On the other hand, the mystery of the real reality is intimately tied to understanding our own consciousness.
Quantum physics is not some obscure field of study that most scientists are completely unfamiliar with. I dare say that many who understand quantum physics far better than Deepak Chopra or I have had no problem reconciling it with their atheistic worldview. As examples of this, I offer up Lawrence Krauss and Stephen Hawking. But let's not rely on an argument from authority. Let's delve into this matter a bit deeper. A lot of the discoveries of quantum physics are strange and bring into question the very nature of our reality. However, just because there are things we don't understand about quantum physics yet is no cause for one to interject God into the mix. At one point, we didn't understand where rain came from, so we invented myths about that. We didn't know what the sun and moon were, so we invented myths about them too. It's human nature to invent myths about what we don't understand, and that's all Deepak Chopra is doing. It's God of the gaps, God as a placeholder for real knowledge as yet undiscovered. Let's return to that last sentence again. We're not through with it yet.
The problem with naive realism is that, although workable, it's not scientifically valid, and it can't possibly lead to God.
So the problem with naive realism, as you call it, aside from your poorly argued contention that it lacks scientific validity, is that it can't lead to God. What a ridiculous statement. It doesn't lead to my conclusion, so it must be wrong. It doesn't support what I believe, therefore it is false. He goes on to make the following argument in 5 parts.
1. If all experience is subjective, going inward is a valid means of exploring reality. 2. In this exploration, new levels of consciousness reveal themselves. 3. At deeper levels of consciousness, perception changes radically. 4. As perception changes, so does reality itself, since nothing is real for us beyond what we can perceive in some way. 5. The conjunction of the individual mind with the source of consciousness is where God lives.
This is some incredible sophistry. All experience is subjective, therefore going inward is a valid means of exploring reality? No, it's a valid means of exploring yourself and your own psyche, nothing more. A paranoid schizophrenic can look inward and see that the Illuminati are tracking his every move. That doesn't make the Illuminati real. It is part of that person's experience, but experience is not always a valid source of what is real. Experience is flawed. That's why science isn't based on observation alone. It seems to me that Deepak Chopra wants science to be observe, hypothesize, declare hypothesis correct. That's not how it works. You have to test your ideas. You have to allow others to test your ideas. You have to see if your ideas actually explain anything. You have to see if your ideas can accurately make predictions. Science is designed to remove human error from the quest for truth and understanding. Deepak, your combative attitude towards science is because you oppose your ideas being placed under this sort of rigorous scrutiny. It's understandable why you're frightened of science, because by the standards of science, your ideas are essentially trash.